CEO of Intel. He left Hungary in the 40s. A few years after he left Hungary, the Soviets came in, locked down the country, and they had no freedom for decades. And he created Intel, and one of the things that Andy talked about was these rare occasions that he called a strategic inflection point, where everything that we take for granted, all the rules of business that we understand, everything that makes sense in our business or personal life changes and changes fundamentally. We have competitors who emerge from other places. And the things we take for granted are no longer true. To give you guys a sense of what a strategic inflection point would be in your personal life, it'd be like going to bed with your spouse and waking up the next morning with somebody else. You guys are happily married. It's that big. And the key thing about strategic inflection point is that when it happens, you have to take it very seriously because the world has changed. Japan had a strategic inflection point. This is a tsunami. A young man was standing on his balcony looking at the seawall. The seawall had always been sufficient to protect his city. I think I'm going to turn this on. The seawall had always been sufficient. Stay over there. The seawall had always been sufficient to protect the city, and it wasn't. In fact, at the end of this event, his entire city was devastated. That was in March. Now, if you don't, keep still. Okay. That was in March. Today in December, Japan is still struggling to try to get itself together. March, December. Most of us believe it's going to be years before Japan turns itself around. We are facing a couple strategic inflection points that are significant. One of them is economic. We have a global economic challenge. The Europeans are trying to figure out how do you hear an echo in here? Yeah. I hear an echo in here. All right. How about that? That better? Yes. Yes. Now we know where my voice is, right? Coming out of my shirt. Higher? No, what is? Is this working?
Yeah.
This is working without an echo. So we're going to leave it right down here. Who knows what's going to happen? Anyway, the Europeans are still trying to figure what the heck to do. There's some who say they have a solution. Moody's doesn't think so, and Doggett don't think so. Because their solution requires, now think about this, every single country to submit their national budget to the European Parliament in Brussels, where that European Parliament has the ability to say, we don't like this spending item in line X, Y, or Z. As we like to say in Texas, that dog don't hunt. It's not going to happen. So that solution is not a solution. I expect at some point, Europe as we know it's going to change fundamentally in the EU, and the euro will probably not exist. Secondly, we have to get very honest. I'll spend a lot of time talking about it, about the debt challenge we face in this country. It is significant. It's not going away. And third, there are new competitors. I talked about it 3 years ago. They become even more significant. These competitors are fascinating, but they're changing the nature of our world, and we have to take them seriously. And as far as energy is concerned, there's so much going on. If you go up to North Dakota, and I've been there a few times, I have some clients up there, it is the most dynamic economy in America. They have jobs. They have jobs that they can't fill. They have jobs that they can't fill, and they're paying really good money because of energy. There's a lot going on, and I'm going to talk about it as quickly as I can. Now, I know you guys have to get out at 8:30. I have an hour and a half presentation, so I'm going to give you whiplash as I go through a few of the slides, but we're going to get through all of it. This is a slide that a friend of mine sent me in early 2010. And it talked about pigs, and I thought he was talking about bacon, and he wasn't. Pigs represent Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. And if you could see it carefully, what you would see was that at the end of 2009, this came from Morgan Stanley, by the way, Greece, which was threatening the stability of the European Union and the euro, had $238 billion of debt, sovereign debt. $238 billion. The Portuguese had an extra $50 billion. The Irish had about $867 or $70 billion of debt. the Spaniards and the Italians had over $1 trillion of debt. And what my friend said in early 2010, he said, if you look at this data, the only thing that's sure is that each one of these countries are going to have problems. That's 2010. And what do we know? Everyone has lost its government. Almost all of them have gone through restructuring, with Spain and Italy being the biggest ones, now coming up for restructuring. And the question of whether or not Greece is going to be a sovereign nation is still unresolved 2 years later. This is why Greece is having problems. If you look at the slide, it talks about how much you'd have to pay in interest, or you'd receive an interest if you bought a 1-year T-bond for the Greek Republic. 70%. A 2-year, 50%. Think about having a mortgage with 70% interest. And a 10-year, 19%. Translation, the market was absolutely convinced that Greece was going to go bankrupt. And it is. More importantly, if you look at this one, it shows that as Greece is in the middle, as significant as Greece's debt was, if you look at Spain or Italy, and this is the amount of debt held by major European banks, there's simply not enough capital in Europe to bail out Spain and Italy. And yet they have the same financial challenges that Greece has. So what does that mean? And I'm going to bring this back to energy again and again and again. If my sense is accurate, and the European Union as we know it changes fundamentally, and countries that now use the euro either cease using the euro or they were kicked out of the eurozone, the implications for financing energy projects are obvious. The price is going to go up. The price is going to go up. We're going to see much more volatility in the market because some countries that can now sign long-term contracts are going to be forced into the spot market. You pay with cash, there's no long-term contract. So the implications are serious for anybody in the energy space, which you of course are. Other thing to look at is, this is really fascinating. This showed up in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. This looks at European banks that have guaranteed other European banks exposure to sovereign debt. These are swaps, collateralized debts, security instruments. These are the same things that resulted in our wonderful subprime crisis. And what this shows is that every major bank in Europe has ensured that other major banks aren't going to lose money if these countries go belly up, and these countries are going belly up one. It's not just Europe, though. If you listen to the folks in Washington, it's the GOP's fault or it's the Democrats' fault. But if you look at the data, we have had a bipartisan addiction to borrowing money since before World War II. And we have believed economists who have said something that you and I as business people know can't be true. They've said, as long as you only borrow 3% more than you bring in, you can do that forever. You try to do that, and some people will be coming to visit you with guns and subpoenas. You're bankrupt, we're taking over your business. But we believe that. We believe that we can spend 3% more than we make. And you know about this, but this is not just a challenge in Michigan, it's a challenge across the country. Manufacturing as a source of much of our wealth in this country has fallen off the table, and now the government's on the verge of being the largest economic engine in this country. If you like that, thank you. If you don't, I was going to say, I have a state where you can go, it's called California. But here's where it gets interesting about our addiction to debt. This chart looks at Civil War, World War I, World War II, in deficit spending. If you look at the far right on this chart, what you see is that today our deficit spending is equal to that of the Civil War. To put things in context, Civil War is the most bloody war America ever experienced. 600,000 Americans died, more in the Civil War than all of our other wars combined. I was doing a little research because somebody said I had my numbers wrong, and he was right. It's hard to believe this. In 1865, the population of America was 35.2 million people. Today it's 312 million. And so if you take that 600,000 and you adjust it for 312 million people, it's 4.7 million Americans. lost a lot of good men and women in Iraq and Afghanistan. The number's around 5,000 to 6,000 versus 4.7 million. So we are spending, we are borrowing at that rate, and we're not in a war of that significance. Strategic inflation. Second thing you'll hear is you'll hear people say that the recession is over. Unless you're in Michigan or some parts of the country I've been in. What this chart shows is every single recession that we've had, and the job loss. Starts at zero. So many jobs you had at the beginning of the recession, goes down, negative numbers. When it gets back to zero, the recession is over. At the bottom, they're months. The red line is us. We're in the midst of the deepest, most destructive job loss recession since 1948. And my economist friends, they like 3%. They say if our economy grows by 3% a year, we'll get back to zero in 2020. 2028 more years. That's what they say. And so my response, of course, is, well, we need to grow a lot faster than 3%. And that's one of our challenges. How do we grow our economy a lot faster? All right. I lost something. Madame, what happened? Fortunately, I have a young lady who's going to make sure that nothing goes wrong. You need to go back? Okay, that's it. And to give you a sense of how significant our debt addiction is, look at these numbers. Beginning of this century, $5.7 trillion of debt. By 2008, we had doubled it. We added another $5 trillion today. And if we continue to spend at the current rate, it'll be $23 trillion. You don't have to be a business person to know that's just simply not sustainable. Because that has to be paid back. If we decide to go the route of Greece, the whole world collapses. Because we are still the largest economy in the world. But what I find when I talk to people in Washington, D.C. and a lot of state governments is that they're not willing to say, this has to be solved. They're still arguing about what type of chaise lounges they're going to put on the Titanic of debt that we now sit on. Which is why I go around the country talking to people like you, business people, who understand if you continue to spend more than you bring in, bad things happen. We as a country have to do something about that. The implications for energy projects, though, are significant. As the world understands this picture, what do you think is going to happen to the price of our government debt? Up or down? It's going to one direction. Which means the price of everything that we do, including anything that a municipality does, is going to go up. So you have an important decision to make. You're going to make the one that's best for Holland. But you need to get after it as quickly as possible because this is a low-cost government debt. And that will not continue. Can't. All right, let's try this video. This is a video that showed up just before the 2010 election. It upset a lot of people, but it was very powerful. When that ad came out, it was very controversial. People didn't like it. Nobody likes kids laughing at you, especially if they're Chinese kids. Seriously. I've shown this around the country, and people get really upset laughing at us. How could they do that? So let's look at the data from the United States Department of Treasury. As of September of this year, the largest foreign creditor of the United States government is the People's Republic of China. And when you add Hong Kong and Taiwan, which I view as wholly owned subsidiaries, the number is $1.4 trillion. Let me put this in context. This year, the United States government will borrow $1.3 trillion to finance the deficit. The Chinese, the Hong Kongese, and the Taiwanese are loaning us $1.4 trillion. So that video that's saying if we don't watch out by 2030, they're going to own us, it's not a scare tactic. It's trying to get us to take